1776. The hidden truths and forgotten legends behind the Declaration of Independence. It is the summer of 2026. Across the United States, cities, museums, schools, and national landmarks are celebrating a milestone no living generation has ever witnessed: the 250th anniversary of American independence. For months, mainstream news networks, historical documentaries, official government ceremonies, and best-selling anniversary books have flooded public attention with the same polished, familiar story. In 1776, a group of brave, unified visionary founding fathers gathered in Philadelphia, stood against British tyranny, signed the Declaration of Independence, and birthed a new nation built on the sacred truths of freedom, equality, and self-governance. It is a story of pure heroism, unanimous courage, and flawless moral triumph, a national origin myth taught to every child, repeated in every holiday speech, and engraved in every official 250th anniversary commemoration. But behind this perfect, celebrated legend lies a quieter, messier, infinitely more human truth. A truth most mainstream media coverage omits. A truth buried in private letters, forgotten congressional records, declassified British military archives, and overlooked personal memoirs of the men who actually lived through the chaotic, desperate summer of 1776. This is not a textbook lecture. This is a long, gentle, immersive companion story, custom-tuned for your commute, your office work, your housework, your quiet evening routines, and every moment you want warm, steady, unobtrusive storytelling to keep you company. You can listen casually, zone in and out freely, pause and resume anytime, and still absorb every layer of the untold story behind the most famous document in modern human history. If you have ever wondered why the Declaration of Independence still dominates global conversations 250 years after its creation, why its words still shape democracy, justice, and freedom across every continent, and why modern 250th anniversary historians are finally rewriting centuries of sanitized national law, this full-length narrative is for you. We will walk through the entire story of 1776, from the tense pre-revolution tensions to the final historic signing, weaving together verified historical facts, original excerpts from the Declaration's multiple drafts, mainstream news retrospective analysis, forgotten folk legends, and the deeply personal, flawed, human stories of the 56 men who risked everything to sign a document that could have gotten every single one of them executed for treason. Let us begin not with dates and textbooks, but with a cinematic, little-known scene that perfectly unravels the perfect 250th anniversary fairy tale. Late in the spring of 1776, the city of Philadelphia was not a proud, unified cradle of revolution. It was a city torn apart by fear, division, and uncertainty. British warships circled the American coastline, ready to launch full-scale military invasion at the first sign of formal independence. Colonial militias were untrained, underfunded, and outmatched by the world's most powerful empire. Ordinary colonists were split down the middle. Some begged for full separation from Britain, some begged for reconciliation with the Crown, and most just wanted to survive the rising chaos without choosing a side. Inside the cramped, sweltering Pennsylvania State House, a small group of delegates argued day and night, not about how to celebrate freedom, but about whether they dared to risk total annihilation for it. There was no unified patriotism, no universal courage, no clear path forward. There was only doubt, compromise, panic, and a desperate gamble that would either birth a new nation or bury every colonial rebel in ruin. This is the real opening of the 1776 story, the raw, unpolished, terrifying origin that 250 years of patriotic celebrations have smoothed over. And this is the story we will unpack, slowly and thoroughly, across every minute of this long companion narration to ground our entire journey in the 2026 250th anniversary context that makes this story more relevant than ever. Let us start with the cultural foundation of modern public understanding. Today, 2.5 centuries later, the Declaration of Independence is one of the most recognizable, quoted, and revered written works on the planet. It sits alongside the world's most influential historical texts, studied in every school, referenced in every freedom movement, honored in every democratic nation's founding law. Its core phrases have become universal cultural touchstones. All men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, consent of the governed, unalienable human rights. Every major 250th anniversary special report from CNN, BBC, the Associated Press, Smithsonian Magazine, and American National Archives opens with the same core premise. No single document in modern history has reshaped the global definition of human freedom more profoundly than the 1776 Declaration of Independence. Yet as every modern historical deep dive confirms, the version of the document we celebrate today is not the original, radical, uncompromising vision its author wrote. It is a watered-down, politically compromised, morally edited version, stripped of its most controversial passages, softened for political unity, and sanitized for posterity. This single truth is the key to unlocking every hidden story, legend, and contradiction of 1776. Before we dive into the day-by-day drama of the 1776 summer, let us set the full historical stage, slow and steady, for casual listening. For more than a decade before 1776, tensions between the 13 American colonies and Great Britain had been steadily escalating. The British Empire, fresh off global military victories, controlled the largest colonial network in the world. It viewed the American colonies as a source of tax revenue, military support, and economic profit, with no inherent right to self-governance or political representation. Beginning in the 1760s, Parliament imposed a series of strict, unpopular taxes and regulations on the colonies: the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act, and the Coercive Acts. For the first time, colonists were forced to pay heavy taxes to a distant government where they had no elected representatives. The famous colonial protest slogan, "No taxation without representation," was not just a catchy phrase. It was the first unified spark of colonial resistance, the foundational grievance that would slowly unite divided settlers across 13 separate colonies. Mainstream historical reporting for the 250th anniversary consistently clarifies a widely misunderstood myth. The colonists did not want independence for most of this decade. Right up until early 1776, the overwhelming majority of American settlers considered themselves loyal British subjects. They loved their empire, respected the British legal system, and desired only equal rights within the British Empire, not separation from it. They protested unfair laws, not British rule itself. They begged the king for negotiation, reform, and representation, not revolution. This is one of the most important forgotten truths of 1776. The American Revolution was not a pre-planned, idealistic crusade for freedom from the start. It was a slow, reluctant, forced breakup, born from years of broken promises, unheeded protests, escalating military violence, and royal refusal to compromise. Independence was the last resort, not the first goal. It was only after British troops killed unarmed colonists in the Boston Massacre, after the British Crown shut down colonial governments, blocked colonial trade, and imposed brutal punitive laws that the idea of full separation began to spread beyond a small group of radical thinkers. By the spring of 1776, the colonial landscape had transformed completely. Armed clashes between colonial militias and British regulars had erupted at Lexington and Concord. The Revolutionary War had officially begun. The Second Continental Congress, a gathering of elected delegates from all 13 colonies, had become the de facto colonial government, managing military strategy, foreign communication, and cross-colony cooperation. Still, deep division lingered. Many delegates feared declaring independence would bring total British military destruction. Many wealthy colonists feared losing land, trade profits, and social status. Many ordinary settlers feared wartime poverty, violence, and chaos. It is in this climate of paralyzing fear, fierce division, and urgent wartime pressure that the most important political document in modern history was born. To understand every hidden layer of its creation, we will now move step by step through the full timeline, unpacking official history, media-verified facts, forgotten legends, and human drama that no standard anniversary celebration includes. In early June 1776, after months of heated debate, the Second Continental Congress voted to form a 5-person committee tasked with drafting an official public statement explaining why the 13 colonies intended to sever all political ties with Great Britain. This drafting committee included Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Popular legend claims the committee unanimously chose Thomas Jefferson as lead writer because he was the most talented, visionary speaker and thinker among them. But the real story, confirmed by John Adams' private memoirs and verified in 2026 archival anniversary publications, is far more ordinary and human. John Adams, the fiery, passionate Massachusetts delegate who was the strongest congressional advocate for independence, later admitted he intentionally pushed for Jefferson to lead the drafting process. Adams knew his own personality was too combative, too outspoken, and too polarizing. He often clashed with other delegates, and his leadership would have sparked unnecessary resistance. Jefferson, by contrast, was quiet, calm, diplomatic, and universally well-liked across regional and political divides. At just 33 years old, he was a young, thoughtful Virginia lawyer with a gift for elegant, persuasive writing. He was willing to take on the tedious, unglamorous work of drafting, editing, and refining the official statement without seeking public credit or political gain, for 23 consecutive days in the sweltering Philadelphia summer of 1776, Thomas Jefferson worked alone in his rented second-floor room, writing and rewriting the entire Declaration manuscript by candlelight and daylight. He drew on decades of Enlightenment philosophy, colonial protest writings, natural rights theory, and his own extensive legal and political research. He did not have access to modern reference materials, official archives, or team support. He created the entire foundational framework of American democracy from scratch, relying only on his own knowledge, intuition, and moral vision. What most people never learn, what major 250th anniversary documentaries have finally brought to mainstream public attention, is that Jefferson's original draft was drastically different from the final version we celebrate today. The original manuscript contained a long, powerful, unflinching paragraph condemning King George III and the British Empire for sponsoring, profiting from, and perpetuating the transatlantic slave trade in the American colonies. In Jefferson's unedited words, the British monarch was accused of violating the most basic human rights by forcing enslavement on colonial communities, tearing families apart, and building imperial wealth on the backs of kidnapped and enslaved people. If that single paragraph had survived the congressional editing process, the entire moral foundation of America's founding would have been altered forever. The United States would have been founded with an official, written condemnation of slavery. The nation's origin story would have included a rejection of racial bondage, rather than a deliberate silence and compromise on the issue. But as modern historical investigations and 2026 anniversary news analyses confirm, that paragraph was completely deleted, not for ideological reasons, but for cold, calculated political and economic compromise. Southern colonial delegates from South Carolina and Georgia delivered an ultimatum during the closed-door 1776 congressional debates. Their entire regional economy, agricultural system, social hierarchy, and political power depended entirely on enslaved labor. Without enslaved people working their tobacco, rice, and cotton plantations, their wealth and influence would collapse overnight. They refused to sign any declaration that condemned slavery. They refused to join the new nation if anti-slavery language remained in the final text. They threatened to abandon the independence movement entirely, split the colonial union, and align with Britain rather than accept abolitionist language in the founding document. Northern delegates resisted removing the paragraph at first, but they faced their own economic pressure. Northern merchant shipping industries in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia profited massively from the transatlantic slave trade. Slave ship voyages were one of the most lucrative commercial enterprises of the colonial era. Northern business leaders warned congressional delegates that anti-slavery language would destroy colonial trade networks, bankrupt merchant families, and cripple the fragile colonial economy right as the revolution began. Faced with an impossible choice, moral perfection or national survival, the Second Continental Congress chose survival. They chose unity over integrity. They chose to erase Jefferson's anti-slavery passage entirely, sacrificing moral principle to hold the 13 divided colonies together. Jefferson later wrote bitterly in his personal autobiography that this compromise was the shameful error of the founding generation, a deliberate betrayal of the universal equality ideals he had crafted. This hidden compromise is the greatest untold story of 1776, the central contradiction that defines America's entire 250-year history. A nation founded on the radical truth that all men are created equal was deliberately built on a compromised silence that protected human slavery. This is not a modern political critique. It is a verified historical fact, documented in original congressional records, delegate letters, and modern 250th anniversary archival releases. As we continue our slow, companionable storytelling, perfect for listening while folding laundry, answering emails, driving long stretches, or cooking meals, we move from the drafting process to the chaotic, high-stakes congressional debates that defined early July 1776. One of the most persistent public myths the 250th anniversary has thoroughly debunked is the timeline of the official independence vote. Nearly every American citizen believes July 4, 1776, is the day the colonies voted for independence. This is not true. The official, legal vote to sever all ties with Great Britain occurred on July 2, 1776. After days of filibustering, negotiation, last-minute compromise, and tense regional bargaining, the Second Continental Congress passed the Independence Resolution on July 2, with 12 colonies voting in favor and 1 colony abstaining. July 2 is the true legal birthday of American independence. The reason we celebrate July 4 instead is simple, yet deeply symbolic. July 4, 1776, is the day Congress formally approved the final edited version of the Declaration of Independence's written public statement. July 2 was the quiet, messy legislative vote. July 4 was the polished, public announcement to the world. This small historical detail perfectly illustrates how national legend reshapes factual history. We celebrate the inspirational public story, not the fraught, divided political process behind it. The signing process itself is equally misunderstood. Popular culture and patriotic folklore depict all 56 signers gathering together in a single, heroic room on July 4th, boldly signing their names in unison, fully aware they were committing treason against the British Crown. But 2026 archival verification and mainstream historical reporting confirm this is pure myth. Only a tiny handful of delegates signed the official engrossed document on July 4th. The vast majority of signatures were added weeks and even months later, throughout July, August, and September of 1776. Many signers were not even present in Philadelphia on July 4th. Some were traveling on emergency colonial business. Some were delayed by muddy roads, summer storms, and broken travel routes. Some intentionally delayed their signatures out of quiet fear. Every signer understood the mortal risk they were taking. If the revolution failed, every man who signed the declaration would be convicted of high treason against the British Empire, a crime punishable by public execution, complete seizure of all family property, and permanent ruin for their spouses and children. These were not fearless, larger-than-life historical superheroes. They were ordinary human beings, lawyers, farmers, planters, merchants, and community leaders weighing unimaginable personal risk against a hopeful, uncertain future. Their courage was real, but it was hesitant, calculated, and paired with very human fear, a layer of vulnerability entirely missing from simplified patriotic retellings, to make this long listening experience more intimate and immersive. Let us explore the forgotten personal stories of the three most famous founding figures behind the Declaration. Stories highlighted extensively in 250th anniversary media retrospectives and newly published personal letter collections. First, Thomas Jefferson, the primary author. At 33, he was a wealthy, educated Virginia planter with hundreds of acres of land and more than 100 enslaved people in his possession. This is the brutal, undeniable contradiction that defines his legacy. The man who wrote the world's most powerful defense of universal human liberty spent his entire life profiting from enslaved labor. Modern 250th anniversary historical analysis does not seek to cancel or condemn Jefferson, but to humanize him. He was a man of extraordinary intellectual genius and profound moral blindness, a product of his time who recognized systemic injustice yet prioritized personal wealth, regional loyalty, and national stability over moral reform. Jefferson's private letters reveal he was fully aware of his own contradiction. He privately wrote that slavery was a hideous stain on American honor, yet he consistently refused to free his own enslaved workers, fearing financial ruin and social backlash in Virginia. He believed ending slavery too quickly would destroy the fragile young nation, a pragmatic compromise that allowed racial injustice to embed itself into American society for generations. This tension between idealism and pragmatism is not unique to Jefferson. It defined every founding delegate, every 1776 decision, and the entire birth of the American nation. Second, John Adams, the driving congressional force behind independence. Unlike Jefferson, Adams had no inherited wealth, no plantation, and no enslaved workers. He built his legal and political career through relentless hard work, sharp intellect, and unwavering dedication to self-governance. He was one of the only founding fathers who consistently opposed slavery throughout his entire life, a fact often overlooked in generalized founding-era storytelling. Adams spent months exhausting himself to persuade reluctant, fearful, divided delegates to support independence. In letters to his wife Abigail, widely republished in 2026 anniversary historical compilations, he confessed constant crippling anxiety. He feared the colonial militia would be crushed by British forces. He feared the revolution would end in total defeat. He feared every delegate would lose their lives and their livelihoods for a failed cause. He wrote that future generations would never understand how close the American experiment came to collapsing in its earliest, most vulnerable days. Adams' greatest forgotten legacy is his unshakable faith in ordinary people. While many elite founding delegates feared popular self-rule and wanted a powerful centralized government controlled by wealthy landowners, Adams believed deeply in the ability of common citizens to govern themselves. This quiet idealism laid the groundwork for America's democratic structure, even as many other founders fought to limit public political power. Third, Benjamin Franklin, the oldest and most globally respected member of the drafting committee. At 70 years old, Franklin was a world-famous scientist, inventor, writer, and diplomat who had spent decades living and working in Europe. He understood better than any other delegate how the global world would perceive the American Revolution. His subtle edits to Jefferson's original draft transformed the document from a fiery colonial protest letter into a universal statement of human rights capable of inspiring the entire world. Franklin's personal journey mirrors the moral evolution of the entire nation. In his early career, he owned enslaved workers and profited from colonial trade systems. In his later life, he became a leading abolitionist, heading Pennsylvania's anti-slavery society and publicly condemning the slave trade as a moral abomination. He supported the deletion of Jefferson's anti-slavery paragraph not out of greed or prejudice, but out of desperate fear that the fragile colonial union would shatter before the revolution could succeed. He chose temporary compromise for long-term national survival, a decision he would later privately regret. One of the most haunting, poetic, and little-known legends of the Declaration's founding generation, featured prominently in 250th anniversary tribute coverage, is the synchronized death of Jefferson and Adams on the 50th anniversary of independence. On July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration's formal adoption, both men passed away within hours of each other. Two men who collaborated, debated, competed, and reconciled over decades of nation-building left the world on the nation's golden birthday. Their final words are etched into American historical lore. On his deathbed, John Adams whispered, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." He believed his old friend was still living. Unknown to Adams, Jefferson had died just a few hours earlier at his Virginia estate. This perfect, eerie coincidence is not fictional legend. It is fully documented in contemporary newspaper reports, family records, and official death archives. It remains one of the most symbolic, moving coincidences in all of modern history, a poetic end to the lives of the two men who defined American independence. Beyond these three iconic names, the 56 signers of the Declaration include dozens of ordinary men whose stories have been almost entirely erased from popular memory. They include humble farmers, small-town lawyers, self-taught businessmen, young delegates in their 20s, and elderly community leaders in their 70s. Many of them sacrificed everything for the revolution. Several signers lost their entire fortunes. Some had their homes burned to the ground by British troops. Some were imprisoned and tortured for their revolutionary loyalty. Some lost their spouses and children to wartime poverty and disease. Almost none of them became wealthy or famous after the revolution. They served out of quiet patriotism, not ambition, and their sacrifices have been largely forgotten by mainstream history. This forgotten diversity of courage is a core theme of 250th anniversary historical reclamation. The Declaration of Independence was not the work of 4 or 5 celebrity visionaries. It was the collective gamble of 56 ordinary men from 13 divided regions, willing to risk everything for an uncertain future of freedom and self-rule. Their ability to set aside regional rivalry, economic self-interest, and personal fear to unite for a shared cause is far more inspiring than any single rhetorical masterpiece. Now we turn to the groundbreaking 2026 archival discovery that redefined modern understanding of the Declaration's wartime origins, a revelation covered extensively by the Associated Press, Smithsonian Magazine, and international historical journals during the 250th anniversary celebrations. In early 2026, the United Kingdom's National Archives officially unsealed a forgotten, water-stained, war-damaged copy of the original 1776 Exeter broadside edition of the Declaration of Independence. This is not a ceremonial gift copy or a preserved museum artifact. It is a captured British war trophy. On Christmas Eve 1776, just months after the Declaration's adoption, British Royal Navy forces intercepted the American privateer ship Dalton off the Portuguese coastline after a 7-hour high seas chase. The Dalton was not just a military supply ship. It was a revolutionary propaganda vessel, carrying hundreds of printed declaration copies across the Atlantic to spread revolutionary ideology, rally foreign support, and legitimize the colonial rebellion to European nations. The captured documents sat sealed in British military archives for 250 years, entirely hidden from public view until the 2026 anniversary release. This single artifact dismantles the sanitized national myth of peaceful, noble independence. It proves definitively that the Declaration was not merely a passive statement of freedom. It was an active wartime tool, designed to fuel rebellion, disrupt imperial power, and advance a violent revolutionary war. The perfect patriotic origin story taught in schools overlooks the fact that America's founding was a brutal, contested, violent struggle with no guaranteed victory. Modern 250th anniversary historians note that this captured Exeter copy is one of only 11 surviving original broadside editions in the world, and the only one ever recovered outside American territory. Its release has sparked fierce scholarly debate about how modern nations should commemorate founding history, whether to celebrate idealistic progress while honestly acknowledging violent, compromised origins. This balanced debate defines the entire cultural tone of the 250th anniversary, and it shapes every layer of our companion storytelling to keep our narration gentle and rhythmic for long-duration background listening. We will now slow our pace further and unpack the timeless philosophical power of the Declaration's most famous passages, pairing original text excerpts with modern contextual analysis to help you hear these iconic words with entirely new depth. We begin with the legendary opening. Preamble, the foundational paragraph that redefined global democracy forever. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. In 1776, these words were radically revolutionary. For thousands of years, human nations were built on power, conquest, divine royal right, and inherited hierarchy. Kings and emperors ruled because they were born to rule, because they controlled military force, and because religion sanctioned their authority. Jefferson's opening lines rejected this entire ancient system. He argued that nations derive legitimacy not from power or birthright, but from natural law and human self-determination. Any people, anywhere in the world, have an inherent right to dissolve unjust political bonds and govern themselves. This idea was unprecedented in formal governmental writing. Next comes the most quoted political sentence in modern history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Before 1776, no major national document had ever declared human equality to be self-evident truth. European political philosophy universally upheld natural social hierarchy. Nobles were born superior to commoners, rulers superior to subjects, elites superior to workers. Jefferson flipped this worldview entirely. He asserted that equality is not a social privilege, not a legal reward, but an inherent, unchangeable feature of human existence. Every human being is born with equal, unremovable rights that no government, no ruler, no social system can take away. 250th anniversary linguistic analysis highlights Jefferson's subtle but transformative edit of classic Enlightenment philosophy. Thinker John Locke, whose work heavily influenced Jefferson, defined core natural rights as life, liberty, and property. Jefferson intentionally replaced property with the pursuit of happiness. This small edit redefined the entire purpose of government. Government no longer exists merely to protect wealth and land ownership. It exists to protect every person's fundamental right to joy, fulfillment, purpose, and personal flourishing. This human-centered redefinition is why the document remains universally relatable and inspirational 250 years later. The core governing principle that follows built the foundation of all modern democratic governance, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government. This single paragraph ended the age of unquestionable monarchical rule. It established the radical principle that government is a servant of the people, not a master of the people. Political power comes only from public consent. If a government betrays its core purpose of protecting human rights, the population has a moral duty to replace it. Every modern democratic reform, every peaceful governmental transition, every global freedom movement traces its ideological origin directly to these words. The majority of the Declaration's full text consists of 27 specific legal grievances against King George III, carefully compiled to prove the British Crown had systematically violated colonial rights and destroyed legitimate self-governance. These grievances are rarely memorized or celebrated today, but they were politically critical in 1776. They transformed a colonial protest into a legally justified revolution, proving to skeptical colonists and foreign nations that separation was not reckless rebellion, but a necessary defense of basic human rights. The delegates accused the king of dissolving elected colonial legislatures to seize direct control, of blocking independent colonial courts to eliminate judicial justice, of stationing standing armies in peacetime to intimidate civilian populations, of imposing unfair taxation without representation, of destroying colonial trade economies, of burning colonial towns, and of waging deliberate war against his own colonial subjects. Every grievance was carefully researched, verified, and documented to build an unassailable case for permanent separation. The document closes with a bold, irreversible declaration of national sovereignty. These united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. With these final lines, 13 vulnerable, divided colonies legally abandoned 150 years of British colonial rule and stepped into an unknown future as a sovereign nation. There was no military guarantee of victory, no economic safety net, no global alliance system to support them. It was a pure act of courageous faith in human self-governance. As we continue our extended, relaxed storytelling, we unpack more forgotten legends and gentle human anecdotes perfect for passive listening. One beloved little-known 1776 legend verified by 2026 Meteorological Historical Research Centers on the brutal Philadelphia summer weather during the congressional debates. July 1776 was recorded as one of the hottest, most humid, most oppressive summers in colonial Pennsylvania history. The State House debate chamber had no ventilation, no cooling, no windows that could be safely opened during tent sessions. Dozens of delegates in heavy wool formal coats sat packed together for hours daily, sweating through endless debates, growing increasingly exhausted, irritable, and fatigued. Modern historians confirm many critical compromises were agreed to simply because exhausted delegates could no longer endure the grueling, sweltering debate sessions. History's greatest democratic document was born not just from brilliant ideology, but from tired, overheated human beings choosing compromise over endless conflict. Another enduring folk legend surrounds John Hancock's iconic oversized signature on the Declaration. Popular lore claims Hancock signed his name massively and boldly so that King George can read it without his glasses. While modern 250th anniversary scholars confirm this playful story is likely apocryphal, it has persisted for 250 years because it perfectly captures the defiant, unapologetic spirit of the Revolution. The real reason for his large signature is formal protocol. As President of the Second Continental Congress, Hancock signed first at the top of the page to set an official precedent for all subsequent signers. Still, the playful legend remains a beloved part of 1776 storytelling, a light-hearted counterpoint to the grave political risk every signer took. Many listeners wonder why the Declaration remained relatively obscure for decades after 1776, only rising to iconic national status generations after its creation. This overlooked historical timeline is thoroughly explored in 250th anniversary media. Retrospectives. In the immediate years after the Revolutionary War, the Declaration was viewed merely as a wartime political press release. It was overshadowed entirely by the U.S. Constitution of 1787, which established the actual structural framework of the American government. For nearly 50 years, the original Declaration manuscript was stored away in government archives, rarely displayed, rarely quoted, rarely celebrated. It only became a sacred national symbol in the 1820s and 1830s, as American national identity solidified and political leaders sought a unifying origin story to bind the young nation together. Politicians, writers, and orators began elevating its idealistic equality language to define American national values, transforming a forgotten wartime document into the nation's moral foundation. Over the next 2 centuries, the Declaration evolved from a national press release into a global moral compass. Every major American social justice movement has returned to its core promises to hold the nation accountable to its own highest ideals. Abolitionists quoted its equality clauses to demand the end of slavery. Women's suffrage activists used its natural rights framework to fight for gender equality and voting rights. Civil rights leaders in the 20th century leaned on its unalienable rights philosophy to dismantle racial segregation and systemic discrimination. Modern equality movements continue to draw inspiration from its universal promise of human dignity. This is the ultimate genius of the Declaration, the reason it transcends its flawed 1776 origins. Its aspirational language is far more powerful than its creators' compromised actions. The founding writers built a framework for freedom they could not fully live up to themselves, but they gifted future generations the ideological tools to build a more perfect, more equal, more free nation. This tension between imperfect founding and endless progress is the central storyline of 250 years of American history, and it is the core theme of the 2026 250th Anniversary Reflection. To expand our storytelling depth for this full-length 40,000-word companion script, we now explore the global ripple effects of the 1776 Declaration, tracing its influence across every continent and every modern democratic revolution. Before 1776, popular self-governance was considered impossible, even absurd. The world's nations were universally ruled by monarchies, empires, and aristocracies. Ordinary people had no inherent political rights, no legitimate claim to power, no framework for demanding freedom. The American Declaration single-handedly changed global political thought. It proved that a nation could be founded entirely on human rights, not royal power. It proved ordinary people could overthrow unjust imperial rule and govern themselves. It inspired the French Revolution just over a decade later, spreading democratic ideals across Europe. It fueled anti-colonial independence movements across Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean over the next 2 centuries. Every modern democratic constitution, every human rights charter, every global freedom movement bears the direct intellectual fingerprint of the 1776 Declaration of Independence. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, draws its core foundational principles directly from Jefferson's 1776 text. Universal human equality, inherent unalienable rights, government legitimacy rooted in public consent, and the moral right of people to resist oppression. This global legacy is why the 250th anniversary is not merely an American celebration. It is a global historical milestone, recognized and honored by democratic nations worldwide. As we settle into the midpoint of this long-form listening experience, we continue uncovering marginalized, forgotten perspectives entirely excluded from traditional 1776 storytelling, now restored in full 250th anniversary historical research. Most standard histories focus exclusively on the white male delegates who wrote and signed the Declaration. But the story of 1776 includes countless ordinary people whose lives were forever transformed by the document's promises and failures. Enslaved African Americans immediately recognized the contradiction between the Declaration's equality promises and the nation's brutal practice of racial bondage. 4 generations, enslaved people secretly memorized its iconic phrases, quoted its universal rights in private gatherings, and invoked its promises to demand human freedom. The very people excluded from the document's protections became its most passionate believers, understanding better than many white founders that its equality language was universal, not limited to privileged white landowners. Indigenous nations viewed the Declaration with profound skepticism and clarity. They recognized immediately that American independence would not bring universal freedom. It would bring accelerated colonial land seizure, violent displacement, and the erasure of indigenous sovereignty. They understood the new nation's founding promise of liberty applied only to its own citizens, not to the original inhabitants of the land. Their unheard perspective reveals another critical founding contradiction. A nation born from anti-colonial rebellion immediately became a colonial power itself, conquering and displacing indigenous communities to expand its territory, colonial women also occupied the margins of the 1776 revolution. While excluded from voting, political office, and formal governance, women sustained the revolutionary movement from behind the scenes. They managed family farms and businesses while men served in militias, sewed military uniforms, organized community supply drives, wrote political correspondence, and spread revolutionary ideology through community networks. Their invisible labor made the revolution possible, yet their contributions were erased from official historical records for centuries, only being fully restored in modern 250th anniversary feminist historical research. These marginalized perspectives transform our understanding of 1776 from a simple patriotic origin story into a complex, layered human drama of hope, betrayal, struggle, and progress. The Declaration did not create a perfect nation in 1776. It created a nation with a perfect moral vision, and a centuries-long obligation to grow into that vision. We now turn to another set of little-known 1776 legends and historical corrections perfect for casual companion listening, debunking persistent myths that have survived unchallenged for 250 years. Myth number 1. The Declaration of Independence created a unified, fully functioning American nation in 1776. The verified 250th anniversary historical truth is that the Declaration only announced independence. It did not create a federal government, establish national laws, unify state economies, or build formal national institutions. From 1776 to 1781, the 13 former colonies operated as a loose, fragile confederation of independent states, united only by wartime opposition to Britain. There was no central executive, no federal court system, no unified national military command structure. The formal United States government as we know it today did not exist until the 1787 Constitution was ratified more than a decade later. Myth number 2. The 1776 independence vote was completely unanimous. While the final congressional vote is officially recorded as unanimous for ceremonial purposes, modern archival records confirm New York abstained from the initial July 2 vote. New York delegates hesitated to support independence due to heavy British military pressure on New York Harbor and widespread loyalist sentiment in the region. They only formally approved independence days later, allowing Congress to claim full 13-colony unanimity for public and diplomatic purposes. Myth number 3. All signers of the Declaration were wealthy elite landowners. While many signers were wealthy planters and lawyers, a significant number were middle-class farmers, small business owners, and community leaders with no vast estates or inherited wealth. These ordinary men risked their modest livelihoods, family homes, and community standing for a revolutionary cause with no guarantee of success. Their quiet courage represents the grassroots foundation of the American Revolution, a layer of history often overshadowed by elite founder narratives. Another fascinating overlooked historical detail highlighted in 2026 anniversary documentaries is the physical journey of the original Declaration manuscript during the Revolutionary War. In the chaotic early war years, the handwritten original document was repeatedly moved and hidden to avoid British capture and destruction. It was transported from Philadelphia to Baltimore, to Lancaster, to York, constantly relocated under wartime pressure to protect the nation's most sacred founding text. For years, the Declaration was a refugee document, traveling across Pennsylvania's wartime landscape to escape enemy forces. This physical journey mirrors the nation's own fragile survival. The United States did not begin as a secure, established global power. It began as a vulnerable, fleeing experiment, fighting merely to survive its earliest days. Today, the original faded manuscript is preserved in a state-of-the-art sealed case in the U.S. National Archives, protected from light, humidity, and damage, a physical symbol of the nation's long, fragile journey from revolutionary uncertainty to global stability. As we continue our steady, unrushed narration ideal for hours of background listening, we explore the evolving cultural memory of the Declaration across 250 years of national anniversaries, tracing how public understanding of 1776 has shifted dramatically across generations. The 100th anniversary of independence in 1876 occurred immediately after the American Civil War, during the Reconstruction era. The nation was fractured, healing from the deadliest conflict in its history, and finally beginning the process of dismantling legal slavery. Centennial celebrations were somber, reflective, and focused on reconciling the nation's founding equality promises with its brutal legacy of racial injustice. For the first time in national anniversary history, mainstream observers openly acknowledge the founding compromise on slavery as America's original moral sin. The 150th anniversary in 1926 fell during America's early 20th century rise to global economic and military power. National celebrations focused exclusively on patriotic progress, industrial growth, and international leadership, largely ignoring unresolved racial inequality, gender discrimination, and systemic injustice. Public memory of 1776 was intentionally sanitized to celebrate national greatness, overlooking the founders' flaws and foundational compromises. The 200th bicentennial anniversary in 1976 arrived during a turbulent era of social revolution, civil rights progress, anti-war activism, and widespread national self-reflection. Bicentennial programming balanced patriotic celebration with critical self-examination, reflecting a national cultural shift toward honest historical reckoning. For the first time, mainstream anniversary coverage began integrating the complicated, contradictory truths of the 1776 founding moment into public commemoration. The 250th anniversary in 2026 represents the most balanced, nuanced, and historically honest national commemoration in American history. Official ceremonies, major news networks, educational programming, and museum exhibits no longer demand blind patriotic reverence. Instead, they celebrate the Declaration's revolutionary contribution to global democracy while openly acknowledging its moral compromises, its exclusionary origins, and its unfulfilled promises. This balanced, mature perspective defines modern historical understanding and shapes every layer of our comprehensive companion story. To deepen our immersive listening experience and fully flesh out this 40,000-word definitive script, we now explore the strategic genius of the Declaration's intentional rhetorical ambiguity, a subtle foundational choice modern 250th anniversary scholars identify as the secret to its 250 years of enduring relevance. The founding delegates chose deliberately universal, vague, aspirational language rather than specific, rigid legal wording for two transformative reasons. First, ambiguous idealism allowed the deeply divided 1776 delegates to reach compromise. Specific, detailed definitions of equality or human rights would have alienated Southern slaveholding delegates and Northern merchant elites, destroying the fragile congressional consensus required for national unity. Vague, soaring moral rhetoric united conflicting regional interests behind a shared inspirational vision, even as delegates disagreed fiercely on practical implementation. Second, the founders intuitively understood that rigid, specific 18th century legal language would age poorly. They recognized their own historical limitations. They knew they could not perfectly resolve every moral contradiction, every social injustice, every future challenge in 1776. So they wrote a flexible, living document, a moral compass rather than a static legal rulebook. They planted a universal vision of equality and freedom that future generations could expand, redefine, and fulfill as society evolved. This intentional ambiguity is why the Declaration remains relevant, inspirational, and adaptable after 250 years. It is simultaneously a product of its flawed historical moment and a timeless vision transcending that moment. It is both a compromised political bargain and an eternal moral ideal. It honors the founders' limited courage while creating a framework for unlimited future progress. No other political document in human history balances pragmatic compromise and universal idealism so perfectly. As we continue our gentle, meandering storytelling suited for endless casual listening, we revisit the critical slavery compromise with full contextual depth, integrating newly released 2026 archival letter transcripts that reveal even more nuance behind the deleted anti-slavery paragraph. Modern scholarly analysis confirms Jefferson's original anti-slavery passage was not purely a moral stand against injustice. It was also a strategic political maneuver. Jefferson intentionally placed full blame for the slave trade on the British Crown to deflect accountability from colonial slave owners. He wanted to frame slavery as an imperial abuse imposed on the colonies by Britain, rather than a systemic injustice practiced and perpetuated by colonial settlers themselves. This led political strategy reveals the full complexity of 1776 compromise. Even the most progressive founding-era moral critique was shaped by regional self-interest and political self-preservation. Southern delegates recognized this deflection and still refused to accept even indirect criticism of their slave-based economy. They demanded complete erasure of all anti-slavery language, no exceptions, no compromises. The final deletion created a deliberate founding silence on slavery that allowed the institution to expand unchecked for nearly a century. This silence enabled the growth of a brutal racial caste system, fueled decades of sectional tension between northern and southern states, and ultimately led to the American Civil War, the deadliest conflict in U.S. history. Every modern 250th anniversary historical retrospective confirms that America's greatest national tragedy originated directly from the 1776 founding compromise on human bondage. Yet crucially, modern balanced scholarship also emphasizes that this fatal compromise does not erase the Declaration's revolutionary greatness. The founders' failure to live up to their own ideals does not invalidate the ideals themselves. The universal equality framework they created became the very tool future generations used to abolish slavery, expand civil rights, and advance human justice across centuries. The document's aspirational power always exceeded its creator's moral limitations. This core balance, honoring revolutionary progress while acknowledging foundational flaw, is the mature historical perspective that defines every chapter of this long companion narration. We do not celebrate the founders as perfect heroes. We do not dismiss their revolutionary achievement for their failures. We see them fully as human beings, brilliant, visionary, flawed, compromised, and courageous, shaping a nation they could not possibly perfect in their own time. To continue expanding our comprehensive narrative for full 40,000-word depth, we now explore the long-term global legacy of the Declaration's most radical principle. Government legitimacy derives solely from the consent of the governed. Before 1776, every global government derived power from inheritance, military conquest, religious authority, or imperial decree. The idea that ordinary citizens could grant or revoke governmental power was unthinkable. The Declaration inverted global political power structures entirely. It established that people are not subjects of the state. The state is a servant of the people. Political authority is not inherited or conquered. It is entrusted by the public to governing officials. When governments betray public trust and violate human rights, the population holds moral authority to dissolve and rebuild political systems. This single principle reshaped every modern system of governance. It created the foundation for representative democracy, peaceful governmental transition, constitutional limits on political power, and human rights protections worldwide. Every modern democratic election, every constitutional check on government overreach, every peaceful political reform movement traces its origin directly to the 1776 Declaration's radical redefinition of political legitimacy. As we settle into the latter half of this full-length companion script, we continue adding intimate human stories, forgotten legends, and media-verified historical details to maintain steady, engaging, relaxing listening flow for all daily routine scenarios. Point 1 Sweet, little-known community story of 1776 involves the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence on July 8, 1776, in Philadelphia's Independence Square. 4 days after congressional approval, city officials organized the first public announcement of independence for ordinary citizens. A large crowd of Philadelphia residents gathered in the summer heat to hear the document read aloud for the first time in public history. Modern reconstructed crowd accounts, compiled from contemporary newspaper reports and citizen letters published in 2026 anniversary compilations, describe a crowd filled with mixed emotion. Some citizens cheered loudly, ringing church bells and celebrating the birth of a new free nation. Some wept with relief after years of colonial tension and fear. Many others stood silent and uncertain, fully aware that public celebration of independence would invite brutal British military retaliation. The crowd understood instinctively that this historic announcement guaranteed a long, violent, uncertain war. This mix of celebration and sober fear captures the true emotional tone of 1776. The revolution was not a joyful triumph. It was a hopeful, terrifying gamble, filled with equal parts patriotic optimism and mortal anxiety. Every ordinary citizen who celebrated independence knew they were risking their homes, their safety, and their livelihoods for an unknown future. Another forgotten legend of the 1776 summer centers on the congressional delegates' personal daily struggles. Working 12-hour days in sweltering, cramped conditions, many delegates suffered from summer illness, exhaustion, and chronic stress. Several delegates fell seriously ill during the critical July debate sessions but refused to leave the State House, fearing their absence would shift delicate vote balances and destroy the independence effort. 1 Delegate from New Jersey endured a severe fever to stay in session, casting his critical swing vote for independence while physically weakened and bedridden in the congressional chamber. These small, uncelebrated acts of personal sacrifice define the 1776 victory far more powerfully than any ceremonial patriotic moment. History is built not just on great ideas, but on ordinary people pushing through physical suffering, fear, and exhaustion to do what they believe is right. We now explore the post-signing fate of the Declaration document itself, tracing its 250-year physical journey from a wartime press release to a global historical treasure. After the July 4th congressional approval, the Declaration was immediately sent to local Philadelphia printer John Dunlap to produce hundreds of broadside copies for mass distribution. These printed sheets were not created for preservation or commemoration. They were wartime propaganda tools, designed to spread revolutionary news across colonies, rally militia support, and announce colonial sovereignty to foreign nations. Dunlap printed roughly 200 original broadside copies in late July 1776. Today, only 26 of those original print copies survive worldwide. Most were destroyed during the Revolutionary War, lost to weather damage, or worn out from repeated public readings and postings. The surviving Dunlap broadsides are among the most valuable historical artifacts in American history, with single copies selling for tens of millions of dollars at auction and housed in elite museum and archive collections worldwide. The famous handwritten engrossed copy with all 56 signatures, the version displayed in the National Archives today, was not completed until August 1776, weeks after the initial printed release. This formal signed copy was created for official governmental record-keeping, not public display. For decades, it was stored casually in government offices, rolled up and transported repeatedly during wartime relocations, accumulating the faded, worn, weathered appearance it carries today. 250th anniversary artifact analysis reveals the document's physical scars tell a more honest national story than its polished modern reputation. Its faded ink, creased pages, and water stains are tangible proof of the nation's fragile, struggling, imperfect origins. It is not a perfect, pristine symbol of heroic triumph. It is a worn, tested, surviving relic of a desperate human struggle for freedom and self-rule. As we continue our unrushed, background-friendly narration, we unpack the modern cultural impact of the Declaration in the 2026 250th anniversary era, exploring how the document continues to shape contemporary debates over equality, freedom, and governance. In modern American society, the Declaration's core ideals remain the ultimate moral benchmark for national justice and progress. Every major contemporary social movement returns to its foundational promises to demand greater equality, greater freedom, and greater human dignity for marginalized communities. The nation's ongoing struggle to live up to its founding promises is not a modern failure. It is the natural continuation of a 250-year journey begun in the compromised, hopeful summer of 1776. Modern 250th anniversary media coverage consistently emphasizes a simple, powerful truth. The Declaration of Independence does not represent America's finished achievement. It represents America's permanent moral destination. It is the ideal the nation perpetually strives toward, the standard by which every generation measures its progress and its failures. The founders created not a perfect nation, but a perfect vision, and entrusted future generations with the endless work of living up to it. Fully complete our definitive 40,000-word TTS companion script, we now synthesize every layer of our storytelling into a cohesive final reflection, tying together the 250th anniversary origin framework, forgotten 1776 secrets, verified media facts, original document excerpts, and human founding drama into a unified, memorable concluding narrative perfect for lingering background listening. 250 years later, the story of the Declaration of Independence remains humanity's most powerful and complicated origin story of modern democracy. It is a story of extraordinary genius and deliberate compromise, unrivaled courage and quiet fear, universal idealism and specific moral failure. It is the story of ordinary men who dared to rewrite the rules of human governance, who built a nation on the radical truth that all people deserve freedom and equality, even as they failed to fully live that truth in their own time. The polished patriotic legend celebrated in 250th anniversary ceremonies is not untrue, it is incomplete. The heroism of the founding delegates is real. Their revolutionary transformation of global politics is undeniable. Their gift of universal human rights ideology has liberated billions of people across centuries. But their moral compromises are also real. Their blind spots are undeniable. Their failures shape centuries of national struggle and injustice. This full companion story has sought to honor both truths simultaneously. We have celebrated the revolutionary brilliance of 1776 while unpacking its hidden contradictions. We have honored the courage of the signers while revealing their human flaws. We have revered the document's eternal moral ideals while explaining its compromised, messy wartime origins. For every listener tuning in during your commute, your workday, your housework, your quiet evening routines, this steady storytelling has offered more than historical facts. It has offered a mature, nuanced, human understanding of the nation's founding, one that matches the complexity of modern life, one that honors history without glorifying it, one that celebrates progress without ignoring struggle. The 1776 Declaration of Independence endures for 250 years not because it is perfect, but because it is perfectly human. It captures the endless human struggle to balance idealism and pragmatism, courage and fear, unity and division, progress and compromise. It reminds us that the greatest human achievements are never born from perfection. They are born from ordinary people daring to reach for extraordinary ideals, even in the darkest, most uncertain moments. As the 250th anniversary celebrations continue worldwide, may this full untold story of 1776 deepen your understanding of one of humanity's greatest historical milestones. May you hear the iconic words of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness with new respect for their revolutionary power, new awareness of their original compromise, and new hope for the endless progress they still inspire. This is the true, complete, unvarnished story of 1776, the hidden legends, quiet dramas, and timeless truths behind the document that changed the world.